Hi everyone, welcome to our second MedTech talk. In the first one, we looked at challenges in bringing new medical devices to market. Today we are addressing the very hot topic of new medical device regulation that is being introduced in the EU. This is to replace the MDD, or the current Medical Device Directive. I'd like to introduce you to Rok Hrvatin, who is a lead auditor. He's been a lead auditor for over 15 years. He's also a Chief Compliance Officer in Arafast, a medical device engineering company. Hi, Rok. Thanks for joining us today.
Hello. Hi, Igor. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. So let's just begin.
Okay. In your view, what are the main challenges medical device professionals or medical device industry is facing with the introduction of the new medical device regulation?
Well, that's a nice. Well, actually, this question pops out quite often, and the thing is, essentially, I would say there is no difference, because the objectives of the two regulatory acts, let's say, are the same. So they are both aiming at safe, functional device, which have risks that could be accepted with acceptable risk. Yet there's a number of changes between the two documents, from MDD, Medical Device Directive, to Medical Device Regulations. Say just a few of them, just to list a few of them. For example, the first one, which will be stepping in power among the first ones, will be post-market surveillance, which will have to be reported and declared at EUDAMED. And then vigilance, for example, vigilance procedure. Then there is definition of stakeholders in the business chain. For example, so to say, it's stakeholders. I'm using this expression, but the MDR refers to economic operators. Further on, the MDR is introducing the responsibilities of the person responsible for regulatory compliance with the manufacturer. There were changes in scope, in the definition of the scope, small changes, small alignments. There were quite a few changes in classification as well. Say, for example, if you take an example of substance-based devices or devices using hazardous substances, and when we are talking about software, for example, there has been a completely new classification rule for software and for applications. Well, in terms of classification, it is also once the class is assigned, there is also certification routes, which type of route one is able to select and which not, depending again on the risk class being assigned. And one, probably the most visible one, will be the attachment of UDI, its unique device identification code, which will have to be given to each particular device. But these would be probably the most important or the most visible ones. There are, well, the devil is in details, and you will see more of them once you start studying, once you started to study the MDR and its rules.
Rok, you mentioned the classification. I think this is a very interesting topic that many of our listeners may be interested in. If you look specifically of medical device classification within MDR, how it is different from what we are used to from MDD?
Well, again, probably the origin is the same. The core, the framework of classification remains the same. It is risk-based classification. So the higher the risk, the higher the class. Again, it is classification to, well, generally speaking, to 4 classes. class 1 to A to B and 3. Further on, well, class 1 has been amended now with a category besides sterile or measurement function, with a category also for reusable instruments under the sterile instruments, let's say. And there would be changes in classification of implants. Well, there is also additional rules on devices using hazardous substances, for example. And when we are talking about our field, so-called software and so on, I was mentioning before already that there is new rule for classification of software and applications. I think if you go through the rules, you will see rule number 11. Well, these would be the main outlines, but classification which is based on how active the device is, how does it penetrate human body, what is the time of use of device, how long is it used, what is the timing there, and so on. Those principles stay the same. And then based on that, the classification rules will be listed out, and the same procedure of classification has to be applied as it was applied with Medical Device Directive. Just rules are a little bit tuned up, let's say.
So when we look at the classification being different, that means that pretty much every medical device will need to go through the reclassification, not reclassification, will need to review the classification again under the MDR and determine its class and then act accordingly.
Yes, agreed. Pretty much this is the case. So new devices will have to go through classification. Manufacturers will have to assign an appropriate class, and of course this will be reviewed later by notified bodies. While old devices which have been certified already, they have a class already, the risk class already, but well, once it will be necessary to do recertification or certification in line with MDR, then of course classification will have to be reviewed.
Yeah.
If the class doesn't match anymore, well, the new classification will have to be done.
Yeah. Okay. If we look at an example of MDD compliant medical devices that are ready for renewal, will they need to be recertified under MDR as a matter of course?
Yeah. Well, the thing is here, depending again on the risk class of the device. If it is just a basic class 1, there will be basically, there is no certification exists for class 1 under MDD. But any other class, any other class device, it will have to be recertified once again. Well, the thing is now, when does it have to be done and how it has to be done? It's a little bit of question of dates, let's say. Well, before COVID, it was assigned that it would be May 2020, and until May 2020, it would be possible to obtain a certificate in line with MDD, so CE certificate under Medical Device Directive. And this certificate would be valid for the period of the validity. Yeah, so 2024, that was the most. While now with COVID, these dates moved actually, and it is possible still to obtain an MDD certificate, which would be valid again until May 2024. Mm-hmm. But after that, all devices will have to migrate to medical device regulation. So yes, recertification will be necessary, and depending on the validity of CE certificates, which manufacturers have now, well, depending on this validity, it tells them when to migrate to MDR. Okay. What I was mentioning before COVID times and after COVID times and so on, well, just to give a quick explanation, this period, the deadline of obtaining the certificate in line with MDD, was moved because of COVID. It was moved to May 2021.
Okay.
But again, validity only until May 2024.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
I hope the clarification was sufficient.
Yeah, until we have another second round and the dates are pushed a little bit further. Hopefully not, yeah?
Hopefully not.
Okay, look, from a more practical point of view, we notice in the process of certification, many of our clients encounter quite long queues or waiting times with the notifying bodies in Europe. Do you know why this is so, and how long do you expect this to last?
Well, the thing is, in recent years, let's take like 5 years into account somehow, the number of notified bodies, was reduced. What was happening? Well, MDR and MDD actually they were setting requirements for notified bodies as well, not only for manufacturers but also for notified bodies. And as a conformity assessment body, each notified body, in fact, does have to have a certain level of competence and has to follow certain practices. Well, after a few scandals were there, the more strict monitoring of performance of notified bodies was implemented, and it indicated that, well, some notified bodies were below the standard, let's say, and they were ceased their operation. Which means, well, there was reduction of the number of notified bodies, which was, of course, dictating manufacturers to turn to other notified bodies. And that was the main reason, which was primarily stretching the queues, extending the queues in front of notified bodies, and the procedures, which were the certification procedures, which are running within notified bodies. On the other hand, what was happening also was, the trends today now in the world, trends are showing a lot of potential in startups. There is a lot of fresh ideas, new medical devices, ideas how to do new things, how to produce, many of them good ones. But again, they are facing this wall now of long queues in front of notified bodies. So, in combination, factor number one, well, less notified bodies and more interest in industry, more interest with startup, with new medical devices and so on. Well, this combination somehow tends to collide with the factor that, well, we are transitioning now from MDD to MDR, which is extending things a bit further. And I think it will be like this approximately, I would say, during this transitional period until 2024.
Yeah. So it looks like it looks like a perfect storm of multiple factors hitting the notifying body. One is COVID, the other one is new regulation, and third one is a flood of new innovative ideas and startups trying to get certifications for new devices.
Yep.
I mean, it's good for business generally. Let's just hope that the queues can be managed in an efficient manner and reduced in the future.
Yeah, well, we hope to get there. The best thing also within the notified body, the best thing is if you have just enough work that you can handle.
Yeah.
Same as everybody.
Yeah, that's the nature of the beast. Okay. If medical device professionals come to you and ask you, where do I get more information about the new medical device regulation, where do you point them to?
Well, you have several options. Well, certainly, if one wants to be very formal and one wants to be very much to the point and to the last letter, that would be Official Journal of European Commission. and original text of MDR, which is, well, to say that directly, quite a puzzle sometimes. It's long. It is not nice to read, unless you really want to absorb all the quantity of and all the information that is lying there. The thing is, not all the information is so direct that it can be implemented immediately, and one would need to have a decent portion of explanation, a decent portion of interpretation as well. So things are being clarified more in detail through guidelines published by NDCG guidelines. This is Medical Devices Coordination Group, which you can find on European pages. Texts are easier to read, more hands-on, and more oriented towards its practical use. However, I would be recommending not only reading the MDR regulation, the text as it is, but also do visit a seminar or consult a company which is already in it somehow, and which understands what the topic is. Or even it might be that you would be finding a company which is dealing the same kind of a problem as what you are having, operating in a similar field, so that you can actually compare practices, share practices, and see what was going well and what was not so well. So that would be several options. Well, apart from, of course, browsing the internet.
Okay. We have heard it many times that European and American regulatory bodies are trying to make the two regulations more aligned, to make it more in tune with each other. The introduction of MDR, does it mean a step forwards towards this alignment, or what is your view?
Well, in some respect, I think yes, it does. On the other hand, not. Why yes? Why not? The thing is, the body which is operating with kind of a global harmonization. Well, before it was Global Harmonization Task Force, which is now called IMDRF, International Medical Device Regulators Forum. So this body actually is aligning somehow the requirements of particular countries, groups of countries, markets, let's say. Yeah. In essence, the key objective, as I was saying before, remains the same. You would want to have a safe device, all risks are acceptable, and you would want to have a device which does what is promised, what it is intended for. One good step one could see in standards. It was harmonized standards in Europe. It was recognized standards within FDA. So to some extent, let's say technical requirements are the same, if not similar. Well, procedures are different. It is procedure of compliance assessment, procedure of conformity assessment, procedure of certification, of approval. That's different in Europe and in the States. So this administration issue.
So if we maybe look at an example of a regulatory pathway, and let's look at the FDA example of 510K being used in FDA, but not really being available MDR. What's your stand on this? How do you see the two regulation aligning in this field, in this particular example?
Well, 510K in the States, 510K, which is this is one way to go. With the medical device. It is to some extent basically you can find it also in MDR. The basic principle relying on a predicate device, so to say, similar device on the market, which was approved, looked at it before and successfully used and so on, that might be reflected in parts of MDR. Say clinical evaluation, which has to be done, foresees one possibility. It foresees the possibility that there would be devices on the market which are equivalent, this is the right expression, equivalent to the device you would want to place on the market. Mm-hmm. And what one has to do basically is to demonstrate the equivalence between these devices, or if there is more, among the devices, and then based on the results from the previous device, one would be able to confirm the clinical acceptance, the clinical evaluation of the new device, just as one. But it is only one part, one of the components of the MDR certification.
Okay. In addition to the change in the regulation in the EU, we also see Britain exiting European Union. I know it's a wide topic, but specifically medical device professionals, what should they anticipate with the exit of Britain?
Well, for me it's hard to say. What and how to do it, because, well, I was not in this topic so much yet. What I can observe, the situation at the moment. Well, manufacturers will still have to seek compliance, seek confirmation of their compliance of their devices for European market with European notified bodies. So notified bodies, to some extent, they adopted to the situation already, and you would be seeing some ex-British notified bodies were opened in European Union, on the territory of European Union. And manufacturers, what did they do? Most of them, they migrated already to the new notified bodies, which would be, of course, set up at, as I said, at the territory of European Union. Well, on the other side, this is how to comply with European rules. On the other side, I do not know if there will be any additional requirements imposed to the products on British side. There might be some additional requirements. I'm expecting there might be some additional requirements, more as administrative measures, not so much the demonstration pure through testing, through verifications and so on. This is probably beyond my knowledge, beyond my expertise.
Yeah. Certainly a topic to watch out for. There will be changes. Whether UK introduces their own certifying authority or regulation, let's see how that evolves. I think it's all in the making as we speak.
Definitely.
Oh yeah. So if we move on to let's say the more exciting innovation side of the regulation, yes. We observe artificial intelligence and machine learning as a very interesting tools, or the tools of choice of many new medical devices that are cropping up in the industry. And I would like to know more about the regulatory framework as it is prescribed in the new MDR regulation. And is there, what could you tell us about this type of AI-enabled medical devices? What they should be doing?
Well, Igor, I think you hit the topic.
Yeah.
Because the topic when talking about artificial intelligence, well, to be more specific, machine learning. Basically, this is probably one of the hottest topics being discussed today.
Okay.
And if we are looking at it, I believe the growth, the potential of artificial intelligence is immense, and it will be growing in the next years. Well, the thing is, on the regulatory side, the situation is not so clear, I would say, to be modest. Yeah, MDR, it is not specific regarding the artificial intelligence or machine learning. Then, if you refer to, I was mentioning before the guidelines from MDCG, Medical Device Coordination Group. Well, the guidelines to date, their status is it is work in preparation, not really, but it says to be done. Mm-hmm. So still some ideas being brought up. It is in early discussions addressing the topic. I think regulators are pretty much aware of what is coming up. They are pretty much aware of what will be in the next few years. And of course, they have to come up with the good set of rules, let's say, or with a good guideline how to treat the topic. Now, just a little bit of explanation why I was mentioning specifically machine learning. Well, if it is only artificial intelligence with locked, so to say, with locked algorithm, then the device, as it is observed, under consideration, might be treated as a normal software. And once it is placed on the market, the algorithm is locked, nothing is changed. So even the conformity assessment body, so to say, notified body, when it was assessing the device, the software normally, it was assessing the device as it will be and as it will be placed on the market. While machine learning is a bit different beast. You're assessing something which will be modified tomorrow, can be modified tomorrow because the algorithm, the models are learning. And to foresee what will be happening with the device tomorrow, probably not every conformity assessment body would want to guarantee that still everything is in place and in order. There were some guidance documents published already on the side of FDA, very good ones, I would say, and also the perspective, the viewpoint of FDA on the matter. It might be that something similar will be published also within the MDCG. That would be a nice one. But still, when it is about artificial, just to sum it up, what is necessary for a manufacturer who would want to place an AI-based medical device on the market. Nowadays, basically, it is the same requirements as for any software. And, well, the rules are there. The device should not change from today until tomorrow.
So if I understand it correctly, if your machine is learning in the lab and then you freeze the algorithm and put that device or that algorithm on the market, you're pretty much bound to the typical software regulatory framework. And,
right.
But once the device is on the market, it is not supposed to be learning on the go. If you do updates with an extra amount of learning on that device, you would then need to recertify the algorithm again. That is in kind of a basic term.
Do the recertification basically, because it becomes a new device.
Okay, I see. That kind of put it in simple terms for now. It's certainly a topic that would be probably worthwhile discussing in one of the following talks in more detail and look at some specific examples, I guess.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. In the end, a question. What would be your advice to a new medical device startup? What are maybe the key 3 things you would advise them to do before they embark on development of a new medical device?
Well, probably the first thing would be, it's very short. Learn about the route. Learn about the route. So know everything what will be needed up front. Don't just do the device, but go first, consult experts, consult somebody who walked the way already, so that he can pass the information, learn about things, what will be required. Because technical requirements are one part of the requirements. It is always what we see. People are focusing on technical requirements, neglecting the regulatory requirements. And then once they develop the device, they have the device, and now they want to make it medical device. All of a sudden, POC does not stand only for proof of concept. It can be interpreted as proof of compliance as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, and the thing is, you should know what will be in front of you, because you only did half of the way. If you prove the concept, you still have to do the compliance. The thing is, many things have to be done in parallel. They must be done in parallel, in particular if you're dealing with software. Then another thing is, the second one would be probably introduce quality management system early on. Study you have a nice book out there. It's called ISO 13485 edition 2016. So study it and bring in the QMS system, establish it in the company so that you are running under certain procedures, traceabilities, repeatabilities, and so on. What is the basics for successful development later on? And of course, before you would want to start development, you would want to, in parallel at least, you would want to study safety and risk management. Safety and risks, what might be anticipated with the device of the development. This is basically these three things are the key.
Rok, that was very useful. I'm sure our listeners may have their own questions, their own topics that they would like to cover. What is the best place to get hold of you? What is the place where they can reach you?
Hey, Igor, thank you. It was my pleasure, in fact, and I think the discussion was nice here. How to reach me? Well, probably the easiest way is just to write me an email to regulations@aerofast.tech. I think it will be written, the email address will be written on the page.
Okay, thank you. And the last one is for our audience. We would very much like to hear from you. We would like to hear about the topics that interest you, the topics that we can cover in the follow-on MedTech talks. And until the next time, goodbye to everyone. Bye.